When President Biden delivers his second State of the Union address in just a few hours, he'll do so facing a string of domestic and foreign policy crises of his own making. Problems that have only gotten worse in the 11 months since his last address. The crisis at our southern border, inflation levels not seen in 40 years, supply chain mismanagement, an investigation into his mishandling of classified documents, and now a breach of the U.S. skies by the Chinese government. All of this has many asking, what exactly is the state of our union? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Senator John Cornyn. He serves on the Senate Finance Committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the Senate Intelligence Committee. He represents the state of Texas, and he's a part of the Republican leadership in the Senate. Senator Cornyn, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thanks, Tony. Good to be with you.
All right, we have a foreign adversary blatantly and openly spying on our nation and many other crises. As the Biden administration becomes so fixated on their obsessions with their domestic priorities, abortion, transgender ideology, that they've taken their eye off the ball for keeping this country safe?
Well, I think if this spy balloon is any indication, I think the answer to that is yes. It seems like the administration is always a day late and a dollar short when it comes to threats like this. And there is no good explanation that I've heard so far for why this spy balloon, which the president ordered shot down off the East Coast, could not have been shot down before it crossed the continental United States. And certainly this is going to backfire, I should say, on President Xi. While he may think he could do something like this, invade our airspace and threaten our national sovereignty, I think the American people now understand exactly what the nature of the threat is and how aggressive the Chinese Communist Party has been and will continue to be until we stop them.
Senator Cornyn, the president tonight going to try to make Americans feel like everything's okay, but nearly 3/4 of Americans say the country is on the wrong track, and he's the conductor. How is he going to convince Americans that everything's okay?
Well, I don't think he's going to be successful, Tony, because 2/3 of the people polled in his own political party don't want him to run for re-election in 2024. That's hardly a vote of confidence. But I think the president's going to probably ignore things like, as you mentioned, the 40-year high in inflation, which continues to eat into and erode purchasing power by hardworking American families, crime, which has become all too common because, frankly, the police don't believe we have their back through movements like the defund police that make it hard to recruit and retain good law enforcement officers to keep our community safe. And third, I'm sure he will ignore the humanitarian and public safety crisis at the border. I mentioned public safety because last year alone, we lost 108,000 Americans to drug overdoses. Almost exclusively, those drugs have come across the southern border, and the president doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, I mean, it's the real simple solution. It wasn't a big problem before he got here. President Trump, his administration had pretty much shut down this flow across the border. I want to go to the debt ceiling. I want to play this clip from the Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, earlier today. Clip number 2, please.
House Republicans are risking economic disaster by holding our country hostage to push their extreme, unpopular, and downright dangerous agenda. Our plan's simple. It's a plain simple plan. Raise the debt limit clean. It's simple, but it's a real plan.
Oh, wow. So the Republicans are simply saying, look, we've got to have some spending reforms here, and we're not until June until we're up against the wall on this. But the administration is saying they're not going to negotiate. Will Senate Republicans back up the House Republicans on this?
Absolutely. You know, nobody believes in America, including Chuck Schumer, notwithstanding what he just said, that we can continue to borrow money at the current rate, now some $31 trillion in debt, without triggering a crisis, an economic crisis. We know interest rates are high because the Federal Reserve is trying to combat this 40-year high in inflation. And we're spending more and more of our tax dollars just to pay the debt service, the interest rate on our bonds. So everybody knows, including Joe Biden, that this is unsustainable. But this is a big game of chicken, and they're focused on the House. The House needs to come up with a unified plan, but they do, as you point out, have some time to do that. But then when they do, then the Senate Republicans will certainly back them up. Everybody knows this is not something to toy with, but which makes the president's position that he's not going to negotiate all the more irresponsible.
It's going to be interesting to see what he has to say tonight about that. I want to switch topics for a moment. You recently introduced a bill that would bring reciprocity for legal gun owners in states. I mean, the streets are getting dangerous. Americans want to protect themselves. Tell us about this bill.
Well, this is simply like a driver's license for those people who are licensed or authorized within their state to carry a firearm. Some have concealed handgun permits, others, like Texas, have constitutional carry. But law-abiding citizens shouldn't be tripped up if they cross state lines and inadvertently encounter a more restrictive law. Many states do have reciprocity, but what this bill would do would be to grant reciprocity for your state's laws in any one of the other 49 states. Of course, subject to whatever limitations those states may have. But most states do have some form of constitutional carry. And I have to tell you, I was talking with some friends with the Fraternal Order of the Police today, and they were recounting to me some of the response times to the most serious emergencies by police because they're understaffed. And citizens need to be able to protect themselves and their families and are not a threat to public safety.
I want to go to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Just got about a minute and a half here left, but the Biden administration pushing forward some very radical nominees for the court. Some for Abudu, who is she's a young woman who was connected with the Southern Poverty Law Center, caught up in their scandal. We've got those that are clearly against law enforcement being pushed by this administration. Did the Republicans have any chance of slowing down this train?
Well, it's hard being in the minority, and we previously had a tied Senate, and the vice president could come in and break that tie. But our main recourse here is to appeal to some of the centrists in the Democratic Party. I'm thinking about Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. I say centrists, they not by conservative standards, but they sometimes are an ally when the administration goes to extreme lengths to nominate ideological nominees. And so we have been able to stop some. But the potential nominee that you mentioned, or the actual nominee that you mentioned, I think is so extreme, hopefully we'll be able to get them to join with us and stop them. But this is the litmus test for this administration. It's ideological. It's not qualifications. It's not experience. It's not temperament. It's not an even-handed administration of justice. It's ideologues, and we need to stop them when and wherever we can.
Another realization that the American people should see that elections have consequences. Senator John Cornyn, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony.